The next several videos will be on game theory, and I'm going to start out with defining what game theory is. Now, game theory is not confined just to economics, but there are many different fields where game theory is used. And basically, anything that requires strategic thinking, especially when it comes to competition, game theory lends itself. Basically, it's a mathematical study of games and how two parties, or at least two parties, compete. Um, Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to sum up game theory in a very, very clear way in terms of how it helps you when it comes to business and things that are um, not necessarily related to business, but have a same competitive nature. Basically, when we're dealing with right now, we're dealing with oligopoly market structure. So we talked about perfect competition, we've talked about monopoly, now we're talking about oligopoly. And the thing that makes oligopoly special or different than perfect competition and monopoly is the issue of interdependency, meaning when one firm in an oligopoly market structure takes an action, let's say they change price, let's say they change output, their action will cause a reaction by their rivals. And of course, this is because the rivals want to protect their market structure, market share. This wasn't the case with perfect competition. When an individual firm in perfect competition took an action, their actions were not noticed because they're so small. So there was no reaction. And in monopoly, there is no other firm to react. This is what sets one of the things that sets oligopoly apart is the fact that in order for you to see the outcome of your action, you first have to anticipate the reaction of your rival. And this is where game theory helps you think about this type of dynamic. And let me also put it clearly, what game theory helps us in this regard is it helps us clarify, it helps us lay out our options and the possible outcomes. If we didn't have game theory, it would probably be a lot harder for you to see what your options are and what are the possible outcomes. So let's take a look at an example of game theory and how it can simplify things with a classic case of conflict, war. So this is an example of an actual period in Roman history, and we've got a general called Hertilius. So Hertilius is got to make a decision, and since Hertilius is making the decision first, we call him first mover. And basically, Hertilius has got to decide to take his troops to New Carthage or stay at a river named Biaides in a city called Leminium. So he's got a two-part choice, either march to New Carthage or stay and fight at the river. And he's going to fight his rival called Pius. Now, you could read uh, what you see right here several times, and it may take you a couple minutes to figure out, okay, who's who? Hertilius is, okay, he's the first mover, and who's his rival? Is it a guy named Biaides or is it a guy named Pius? Um, what I've just done here is I've laid things out clearly in extensive form game theory. And what this does is it clearly labels who is the first mover, and that's a player called Hertilius. And it lays out his two possible actions. Move his troops to New Carthage or stay and fight at the river. So I want you to compare this, the written form, to extensive form. Which one do you find more clear? I think it is pretty straightforward that this really helps lay out who's doing what and what are their possible actions. So let's lay out Hercules' possible outcomes are from his actions. If Hercules fails to stop his rival, Pius, he loses. He fails in his mission. But if he intercepts his rival, Pius, he has a good chance of winning. Not a 100% chance, but a good chance. So let's ask ourselves, what can his rival do if Hercules chooses to move his troops? Well, when Hercules marches to New Carthage, Pius could stay and fight. In this case, Hercules would have a good chance of winning. Not a 100% chance, but a good chance. Or Pius could take his army while Hercules is marching. This would lead to victory for Pius, an outright victory. So again, you could read these 3 bullet points several times, but let me lay it out in extensive form. So we've already laid out what Hercules' options are, and what we're examining here is this path right here. We're asking, what can Pius do given Hercules is moving his troops? And that's what these 2 bullet points lay out. And I could put the equivalent of these 2 bullet points right here like so. So Hercules moves. Pius could intercept him at Lemnium or fight him at New Carthage. And these are the possible outcomes. So we see if Hercules moves and Pius intercepts him at Lemnium, Pius will have an outright win. But if Hercules moves to New Carthage and Pius stays and fights him there, Hercules has a good chance of winning. Now what we're going to do is we're going to examine this path. What can Pius do if Hercules stays and fights at the river? Well, if Hercules marches and Pius intercepts him at the river, this would deny Lemnium from Pius and mean victory for Hercules. Or if Hercules stays and Pius fights him at New Carthage, then Pius stands a good chance of winning. Now again, you could read these several times, but let me lay it out in extensive form. And again, we're examining this path. What can Hercules do, what can Pius do if Hercules stays and fights? This is what Hercules can do. This is what Pius can do, pardon me. And these are the results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of it together. And I'm going to ask you a simple question. If you were Hercules, what would you do? Would you stay or move? Stay or move. Now take a look. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to think this out. Maybe you would want to pause the video right here because I want you to put yourself in Hercules' position and ask yourself, should you move or should you stay? And take a look at the possible outcomes. So pause it right here. It would be a good time, and then hit play and we'll go over the results. Okay, so I think it should be clear you should stay. Why? Well, look what happens if you move. If you move, Pius could do one of 2 things. And one of the things he can do would lead to an outright win for him. And the best you can hope for, if you move, the best you can hope for is a chance of winning. Now, what if you stay? In this case, you have a chance of an outright win, and your rival has only a good chance of winning. So what you've done here is you've minimized your rival's chances of winning, and you've maximized your chance of winning if you stay and fight. Now, what's interesting is you probably came to this conclusion within a couple of seconds. And I guarantee you, if I kept this in written form, it would have taken you a lot longer to figure out the best move for Hercules is to stay and fight at the river. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take off from here, and we're going to examine some more things about game theory.